about, this is the session of disruptive technologies, and this session will focus on land use and transportation in the sharing economy. Okay, so again, the purpose is to highlight some important aspects of the shared economy, which is the disruptive innovation that we're experiencing right now, and how these players and emerging companies might affect transit and land use in the future. So to set the stage, again, many of us, most of us, will remember when internet wasn't necessarily widely available to the masses. Uh, but the first thing I remember doing as a teenager was chatting on there. So it's no surprise that that it led to social media, and social media, the ability to connect with others, has led to this collaborative economy facilitated by technology. Um, the sectors affected by this are numerous and include not only transportation but money and goods and services and a wide range of things. This graphic was produced by Crowd Companies. And this is the first version, and it was created in 2013, and now it's on version 3, and it's even larger. And so I think I would really highly recommend visiting crowdcompanies.com if you want to kind of see the large framework of how the collaborative economy is currently functioning. Uh, the two characteristics that really designate something in this collaborative economy are one, distributed power. So it takes the power from a large centralized institution and distributes it to the individual or the business. So this allows either individual to individual interactions, business to business, or business to individual. And then secondly, asset utilization. So the recognition that there's a lot of resources out there that are underutilized, and how can we maximize those? And so today I'm going to talk about those related to transportation. This quote from Alex Marshall, "How we get around determines how we live," was really well discussed earlier today in the opening plenary. Um, this is the host of transportation services out there. Some of these have since defaulted. I'm sure there's additional ones that now exist. You'll notice, though, two partners that I'm not going to talk about a lot today. Green Bike, which is the regional bike share that UTA is very interested in supporting for first and last mile connections and improved mobility. And then Enterprise, with whom we partner with car share. They have a car share program, and we have some of those car shares located at some of our rail stops. Enterprise Car Share also is coordinating with the state, and they do some fleet management, some really interesting stuff there. Today, however, I'm going to focus on Uber and Lyft, and primarily Uber in this because it's the larger competitor in our market and how it relates to transit. So these types of companies are part of the peer economy, and these are marketplaces that facilitate sharing and trade of products and services built on peer trust. And I included that because I think trust is an important component, a very human aspect of this economy, that we get very ingrained in the technology and how exciting it is, but really it's the social connections that are really that it allows it to be so innovative and built upon. So how many of you have used Uber before? Okay, so anybody who wants to know more about it, ask those people. I'm gonna I'm gonna really quickly go through how it works, or I can help you afterwards as well. But essentially, you have a smartphone, you download the app, you enter your credit card information, and then from then on you can request rides. Those rides are fulfilled, and then after you're dropped off, you're able to rate the rides, so the driver is accountable. From the driver aspect or perspective, there's a background process, including a driving record check and a vehicle safety check, and then you're able to turn the partner app, is what it's called, on whenever you'd like and begin to provide rides. So how it works, or why it works, is that three main components. Access. So you're only able to access rides if one's available, and vice versa. You're only able to provide a ride if it's requested, right? Safety and satisfaction, we talked about the kind of trust that's built in based on the rating system. Both the driver rates the rider and vice versa. And if a driver's rating drops below, I believe, 3.5 stars, then they're no longer allowed to access the app. And then also this reduces opportunity for discrimination on the driver's side, which has been well documented from taxis, that there is discrimination occurring in on-demand taxi service. And then an interesting part of the Uber's specific model is that they really allow a lot of flexibility in their local markets for marketing and product development. So this is why you see weird things like, we'll deliver a Christmas sweater to your zip code, like for free, or bring puppies for you to pet if you work in this zip code. Okay, so I want to do kind of a comparison here of Uber specifically and UTA so that I can set some context for some comparisons. So Uber was founded in 2009 in response to a taxi problem in San Francisco. And in 2010 was released live and changed its name to Uber following some problems with the California Public Utilities Commission. It was marketed as black car service, and really spread by word of mouth. A lot of the regulations, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but there's a lot of regulations, and a lot of them occur in California, but we can talk about that later if you want. They changed their name to Uber. Everything in green is the capital raised and the valuation of the business. So in 2011, they began to expand. There's some money. They expand in New York, Seattle, Boston, Chicago, and DC. In 2012, Uber X is introduced. This is an interesting business development in that where the model originally was black car service, this now allows a more accessible, lower cost point, and more drivers for that matter, because the restrictions on the auto type is loosened. Also, dynamic pricing is introduced in 2012, which essentially is based on supply and demand. If there's limited supply, then you'll pay more if you're the trip requester, and this incentivizes the driver to drive during those times when demand is higher. More regulations requiring background checks, etc. Additional money was raised, and then Uber Pool and Lyft line. Now, dynamic pricing and all of that is really interesting to the Transit Authority, but not as much so as the Uber Pool and Lyft line functions. So what this does, and if we don't have it in our market, but if you are in a market that has one of these services, you can sign up and request these rides, and you will pay a slightly lower rate than a typical Uber X trip, and you agree in that transaction that if another customer requests or needs a drop-off, that you will deviate from your route in order to fulfill that trip. In 2014, both Lyft and Uber arrive in Salt Lake, I should also mention. But Uber Assist was rolled out in 2014 as well. And this is not wheelchair accessible service, but this is service for people who need a little bit of an additional assistance, such as seniors and people with disabilities who do not use a wheelchair, that they cannot leave on their own volition. Additional money, we're at $40 billion valuation now. January 15, Uber launches Uber Cargo, which marking the launch of Uber as a logistics company. And then mid-2015, they update their privacy policy and essentially is using your GPS if you have the app to track you at all points in time. To give you a comparison of, of, of how public entities have been operating in this realm, it wasn't until earlier this year that legislation was passed that allowed public entities to use anonymized, aggregated geolocational data. So this is just a little bit better, um, and more useful in transportation. I mean, so that's a disturbing and also interesting thing that Uber is doing. There's, of course, I'm not going to go into detail, but acknowledging, what this means for employees and non-employees and contracted drivers, etc. That's certainly a risk factor in their business model. And so early 2016, the early 16, 62.5 billion valuation. So let's acknowledge the weaknesses, or some of the weaknesses, that this growth has occurred during low gas costs. You need a smartphone and a credit card. If you use a wheelchair, you have no service. There are many international players that are larger in India and China and around the world. And also, as my colleague Joe Taylor reminds me, this could be the Netscape or the MySpace of transportation technology. And so we're going to move to a decades-oriented timeline versus an annual one, just to go briefly over a very simplified history of Utah Transit Authority. It was founded in 1953. In 1969, the legislature passes the Transit District Act, allowing taxing. In the mid-70s, the east and west parts of Salt Lake County were finally connected by bus. 1990, American with Disabilities Act was signed, which required paratransit service. In the late 90s, the original north-south light rail line was opened. Shortly thereafter, the university tracks extension Frontrunner North opens in 2008-2009. Tracks the Daybreak, West Valley, and Airport. And shortly, or at the same time, the recession forces service cuts. I'm going to come back to that in a second. Flex route operation was adopted in 2011. This is essentially a fixed route that can deviate from the route for an additional charge and therefore covering more service area. And then Frontrunner South opens. So, as many of you may know, Uber is very, very private with their data. But GJ asked for a morsel, and they gave us this. That in the last 3 months, unique riders in the region was 111,000. So this is oddly close to the number of unique riders that we serve at the Transit Authority per day. So not bad for something that started in 2009, right? A lot of transit agencies, well, I should say, whether Uber and TNCs such as Lyft are threats to transit is debated. Charlotte area transit CEO has said that he believes that the losses in ridership are due in some part to TNCs. However, the findings published March of this year by the Shared Use Mobility Center found that it wasn't as big of a conflict, that most of the trips were actually car trips that were being eliminated, or personal auto trips, I should say. So let's just read through these 4 points quickly. The more people use shared modes, the more likely they are to use public transit, own fewer cars, and spend less on transportation overall. Secondly, shared modes complement public transit, enhancing urban mobility. Third, shared modes will continue to grow in significance, and public entities should identify opportunities to engage with them to ensure that benefits are widely and equitably shared. And 4, the public sector and private operators are eager to collaborate to improve paratransit service using emerging approaches and technology. So I know that they're going to update that report within the next year using, I believe because of the rose-colored nature of it for TNCs, that Uber and the like are going to allow them to distribute some surveys through their email list. So it should be an increasingly interesting report in years to come. So I want to talk just for a second about what the agency can learn and what we've been thinking about kind of in the short to mid-range for this type, what this could mean. First and foremost, there's a market here, right? People enjoy this service and they need it and they want it. So I had mentioned earlier there were cuts in 2011 to service during the recession, and the agency has worked to bring back a lot of service in recent years. We built out the rail network, and now we're focusing on the fine grain. And this is perhaps an opportunity to even go further into that. So routes 227 and 232 are the red routes on this map. And this chart down here shows capacity and ridership. And you can see that only 7.9% of bus capacity is utilized on these routes. However, if you cut these routes, over 200 people are affected. So you can see that the dilemma here is real. In that certain people feel they don't get enough service, and other people feel we're running empty buses. I should also note that these are not indicative of other bus routes. There are many better performing in terms of capacity in the system, and the agency is working to identify those core routes and commit to levels of service on those routes. So what are agencies actually doing? Some agencies begin to partner with transit, partner with the TNCs. DART is notably one of the first and really working on cross-marketing and promotion, providing free rides to and from transit stations. UTA is investigating some of those opportunities. The API integration of the Uber app is really, really easy, in that you can connect to it really easily. So we can just send our customers over, if you want. There's also voucher programs existing in Tampa area where the transit authority pays for the Uber or Lyft ride. There's also emerging on-demand apps that are available for purchase or are developed in collaboration with technology companies that places like Neighborlinks of Florida and Santa Clara Valley Transit Authority are starting to look at. And we're certainly looking at those things as well. But what we're doing now, really the agency is focused on refining the user experience through technology. So first and foremost, we recently released a mobile-friendly website, which is much better than the previous version. In terms of payment, Jen McGrath with our agency and the Green Bike folks are working on back-end payment integration so that you can use the same card for accessing a bike share and the transit, as well as kind of working on, you wouldn't have to pay separately for a pass perhaps. We currently have a mobile ticketing RFP out that I think a lot of people are excited about. As far as trip info and trip requests, the agency received a grant a few years ago that they've used to develop a trip information portal that will provide you all the information on all the different trips that are available to you to complete your journey. And this would include Uber, this would include aging services if you're eligible for those things. And then ultimately that will lead to the ability to request a trip. We have AVL best technology available information-wise for our customers, and then partner information. So Ride Pilot was developed recently. It's an open source software, and it allows for small agencies such as aging providers, vocational rehab providers of transportation to track their vehicles, their volunteer drivers, their drivers, vehicle maintenance, etc. So I just want to touch on a couple things in closing. I think the first point, that personal mobility is key to health, and this is the Active Transportation and Health Summit. It was there were a lot of great facts by Mr. Tyler Norris this morning that certainly helped to paint that picture. And then also I want to advocate for access to technology, specifically smartphones, because these are the tools that are required. And you'll hear some people talk about how smartphone access among low-income individuals is higher because it's their way to access the internet. And that may be the case, but we've recently completed an onboard survey, and certainly the proportion of people who own smartphones in low-income brackets is lower than the rest of the population. And then one more thing, earlier in the session, someone said, in the previous session, someone asked, do connected vehicles, do they result in no more transit? And I wanted to just say a couple things about how I think that maybe isn't the reality that those types of things occur. Our agency exists in order to ensure equity, and also we are really good at moving a lot of people via our high capacity rail and bus network, and also at maintenance and operations. Even if nobody owns a vehicle and we're all sharing vehicles, who's going to maintain those? So those are my thoughts on some of the previous points brought up in the earlier session. So with that, I will turn it to Wilf, and I will start breathing.
All right, give me just a minute here, and let's see if I can pull my PowerPoint, wherever that might be. Where did I put it? Oh, this microphone. Oh, do you know where it is? Go for it, Al. You can tell Allie is of a generation that can do this much quicker than I can. See? That's great. Thank you. All right. So, what the previous speakers, both in this session, Allie, and the session from this morning, have talked about is a lot about the technology itself, and a lot of things that are kind of the gee whiz things about the technology and how it works. And some of the implications were talked about. When you think about what the future might look like, and this, let me step back and say this session and my involvement in this kind of came from a little discussion we were having as we were talking about this conference and the sessions. And we kind of got into this stream of consciousness, wow, and if this happened, wow, maybe this will happen, and maybe this will happen. And there were just a lot of really interesting ideas floating around. Whether they'll happen or not, I don't know. But it's kind of interesting to speculate, and it's also really kind of important to think about, because it may mean that we need to change the way we're thinking about the future. We're great at predicting the future, right? As long as everything stays the same. We do that really well, but we tend to miss the big things that will change things dramatically in the future. And understandably, you just really can't foresee some of these things that will happen, and they have implications beyond what any of us may even think about immediately. And so sometimes it pays a little bit to spend some time and just speculate, think about, and maybe see how things might change, and maybe how we need to look at the future a little bit differently, and how things might wind up differently. So, getting back to what we were just talking about with the other sessions, there were a lot of the gee whiz technology kind of things, but think about, if automated vehicles and connected vehicles and rideshare and things all really come about to the extent that it seems possible that they might. How does that change the future of our urban regions? What does it do to our transportation systems? What does it do to our need for parking and the kind of requirements that we make of various types of land uses in terms of parking requirements and how we get around and where we're going to store those vehicles. And maybe they're not our vehicles and they get stored somewhere else, and just all kinds of just interesting things to think about. And that was talked about a little bit. And the interesting thing, like with what Ali was talking about, my initial reaction was, when you've got Uber and Lyft and those kinds of services going, it's going to mean the death of transit, right? Because nobody's going to take transit anymore. They're just going to call up, especially if they're automated vehicles. Call up, a driverless car shows up and takes you wherever you want. Kind of gets to be the George Jetson kind of thing, where maybe they're not flying vehicles at this point, but they drive. They go wherever you want, and all you have to do is get in, sit down, get out your laptop and start working or answering your emails or read a book or something, and you don't have to worry about it. And these vehicles can travel much more efficiently, much more closely. Wow, what a future. And nobody's going to own cars anymore, and we don't need parking spaces and all kinds of weird things. Well, and so when Ali talked about Uber and Lyft, I thought, that's it. Nobody's going to take transit anymore. But maybe not. Because what Ali just talked about is maybe what people use Uber and Lyft for because of the cost of those services. They just use it for the first and last mile. Maybe. And transit still has a role. And maybe it enhances transit and the use of transit. So, I don't know. And let me say this now, too. Because what we talked about earlier and what kind of led to this session was kind of this interactive stream of consciousness, I want you guys to get involved. So if you have ideas, don't keep them to yourself. Thoughts about what you think about as we talk about some of these things, share them. Let's talk about it, because I certainly don't have any better insight to what's going to happen in the future and how that may shape how our region grows and how it exists in the future than maybe any of the rest of it. So I think it's kind of good to get those things out on the table. Speculate. Let's get the ideas out there, and then I think our vision, our Wasatch Vision 2050 plan, may very well look very different than what our Wasatch Vision 2040 plan looks like, just because things are changing so much. Think about some of the disruptive technologies that happened in the past, and really the changes that they made. We take them all for granted now, but at one point, they were really disruptive. They were really new, and people couldn't really foresee how these things were going to happen. Electric lights. About that, how that changed things. Elevators, invention of automobiles themselves. That was a disruptive technology, right? And things changed dramatically after those things happened. And so, some of the things that we'll look at here are technology themselves, or they're based on technologies that we have nowadays. Some of them are social, the kinds of things that maybe where our conditions are and where we're going and how things go in the future. So, let's talk about one of these items, lodging. Am I doing something, or is somebody else doing it? Technology. I know, I can still see you though, so I just waved my hand. Lodging. You've all heard about Airbnb, VRBO, some of these other services that are online now, where you can go on and find a place to stay. Honestly, folks, these days, just about anywhere. And you're maybe sharing a house with somebody, so it's kind of like a B&B, or you may be actually renting the house and the owner's not in it while you're there. A lot of different arrangements that can be made, but it can all be arranged online, and again, the technology has made this possible. But what kind of implications does it have? The lodging industry, I can tell you, hotel owners and hotel service companies are a little worried about this, because I think they're beginning to see an effect on their room rental rates and their room rental vacancies, and they're starting to lose some market share to these kinds of services, and so that raises then the issues of equity and fairness. The same kind of things that you heard with with Uber and Lyft regarding cab companies and what happened there. So it's disruptive to business models in that sense. But I don't know. A lot of people now will go to places and they'll stay someplace else, either because it's cheaper or because it's just they like the experience better. There's a lot of different reasons why people may choose to do this. Hotels, so what does that mean for hotels? Hotels in our urban environment are an important component. In many of our bigger metropolitan areas, big downtown hotels are important to the economy. They add to the environment there. You know, you get a lot of people in the downtown area that are there visiting. You see them around, and it kind of adds to the ambiance, adds to the character of what's going on downtown. A lot of those urban spaces those visitors are using. What if they're not staying downtown anymore? What does it do? What does it do to the skylines of some of our cities? Potentially, we're not going to have a lot of big hotels. Maybe we will, though, because when you have conferences like this, people like to go and stay close together. So that there probably still will be a role for those hotels and places to stay. But it's hard to say, I think, at this point. Yeah, please do. Thank you very much. That's the flip side of what I also want to talk about now. We're seeing an impact on those neighborhoods where those rentals, those Airbnb and VRBO rentals are located. In many cases, people aren't even aware that a home near them is being rented out and generally being rented out. The neighbors will oftentimes know because they see a changing cast of characters there, and they realize that there's not somebody living there, that they can have as a regular neighbor. But in many cases, it's not very impactful. It doesn't seem to make a big difference. But, you always get that, the 10 frat guys that come for a ski vacation in Sandy, right? And they rent out that house, and it leaves a big impact. But then you also have the collection of the transient room taxes, all of the various things that go with that. Paul, you've been trying to raise your hand. Yeah. 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 It's a whole different experience, isn't it? In the neighborhood. Yeah. Very, good point. Yeah, so the question is, are you required to get permits to rent out? And that is currently the cause of a lot of consternation at the state legislature right now. We had a bill in the last session of the state legislature regarding short-term rentals that was being advocated very strongly by the um, online rental businesses, and they were basically seeking to prohibit local governments from regulating short-term rentals at all. Well, that caused, as you can imagine, caused a lot of consternation. Now, they argued and say in most cases people don't even know they're there, and when they're well maintained and well managed, there's no big impact. And that may very well be, but it's one of those social changes that I think it's going to take a little bit of time to either be accepted or to find some balance there. But it's definitely causing an issue, and it's not just in Utah; it's happening all around the country. In various ways. And some communities are very adamant they don't want short-term rentals in their neighborhoods. Other communities welcome them. When we were doing this discussion here recently, the league had a sponsored meeting to start talking about this in preparation for the next legislative session. Garden City, Utah, up by Bear Lake, they welcome them. They want to have a handle on them. They want to be able to get the transient room tax out of them and the local taxes. And they also want to make sure that they're well managed and maintained. But they don't want to scare them away. They're a big part of their local economy. And so they have figured out a way. They actually use this technology to go online and find out the houses in their community that are being rented out. And then they go contact those owners or the management companies and say, welcome to our club. Here's our rules and the things you need to do. But then they keep tabs on them and manage them. So it's an interesting way of looking. Yes. Good point. Good point. Yeah. Yeah. Really good point. That's a very good comment. When you mentioned that about change in vehicles, I love that commercial. Have you all seen it where the little kid's playing and he's looking at the car and the dad comes out and says, "You ready to get this car?" And then the little kid starts imagining traffic tickets, traffic jam, drop and grow, and he says, "I'm good, Dad. Yeah, I can wait a while." So yeah, it is the experience, and maybe it explains part of what was talked about earlier, the attitude of the millennials about owning cars and driving cars. Good. A long-term rental. Yeah, that's a really good point. Another aspect of that is with the recent economic crisis that we had, and a lot of homes flipped into bankruptcy or foreclosure, and then you wound up having big owners, big companies or whatever, buying up a number of these, and now they're renting them. And in some cases, they're doing short-term rentals with them rather than the longer-term rentals, or putting them on the market to resell. And that may be having an effect as well. Yeah, they need a place to live. Sure. And I think like Park City's facing a similar kind of issue, or has for a long time, has been trying to deal with that. So, all right, great discussion. Let's get through some of the others because we'll run out of time before we get to all of these. The workplace, right? We've been kind of focused on this model for a long time where people live someplace, they get up in the morning, they either get in a car, they get on transit, they go someplace, they go into a centralized place where they work, an office building or something like that, and spend their whole day there, then do the reverse, go home, back home. That's their life. That's the way things work. Well, what's technology made possible today? If you have a laptop and a mobile phone and Wi-Fi capability, a lot of people can pretty much work wherever and whenever. There are obviously jobs and things that require some kind of a different model, but there are a lot of jobs that work that way. And we are seeing, for example, internal office spaces being redesigned in many cases so that the actual desk space or the little office space is getting smaller for people. And the reason is they're not spending a lot of time at that desk anymore. They're working someplace else, or they're doing someplace else. And what they seem to need, the one thing that still seems to be needed out there is this ability to face-to-face interact, either to brainstorm or just to have the social contact and maybe do some other transactions that you need to do. So you get workplaces that have common areas where people can gather together and do things, but small areas for their desks. But a lot of times maybe that social interaction in that other space can take place outside of the actual place where you may be working. So you find yourself an internet cafe, right? And you can sit there and kind of have the breakfast brought to you and enjoy the atmosphere, and people come by and you see them and you talk to them, and so maybe there's a whole different way our workplaces may be functioning in the future. Or maybe rather than to say it's all going to be different, maybe we get more variety, kinds of ways people go, the way they interact, and maybe it has some effect on what are our future office buildings going to look like. Are we going to need as many office buildings or as much office space, or is it going to be different? And the effect that has on our urban environment. And of course, the places where people go to work, then maybe they need to be more than just those office buildings in the streets that they used to get there. Now you need more of those. You need more of those cafes. You need more of those public spaces and urban spaces where people can sit and gather and do whatever they're going to do. So this whole idea of how we work may be shaping how our urban environment is going to be looking in the future. You know, potentially, I don't know. It's something to think about. Any thoughts? Not so much. Oh, Muriel, thanks. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's right. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And think about when you think about. I mean, we had downtowns, and of course, downtowns have kind of transformed themselves, and they are kind of what they are today, and they're a multi-environment of interacting. But we had for a long time, and still do to a large extent, you get this development of office parks, right? And a lot of these office parks, they're not the greatest environment outside of the office. And so if you want to get up and do what we just talked about, get up, go out, go outside, spend some time, maybe take your laptop with you and do a little bit of work out there, see who you can see out there, spend some time interacting. A lot of those modern suburban office parks are not great environments to do that. And so we need to rethink maybe how our future workplaces look and how they work to take advantage of that changing mode of how we're doing our work. And we certainly hear about it. You have the whole idea of multiple use and urban centers and walkabilities and urban spaces that are with that. So kind of attempting to address that. But I think we'll see more of that change as it goes about in the future. Yeah. 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 A resistance to the change just because you're so used to doing it that way and not you don't really know. Yeah, yeah, that's right. Very good. Yeah, Muriel, how many hours do you work? Yeah, okay. Well, and that's the thing, right? I mean, it really allows you to, sometimes you work more, sometimes you work less. It all kind of depends on what other. Uh-huh. got to tell you, when I went to Salt Lake City as the planning director there, just seeing, what was happening, how things were happening, what we were doing, I tried to kind of move more towards a model of saying, okay, all of the staff, you have certain assignments, certain things you need to get done, deadlines to get them done by. I want you to work on these things. I don't care how you do it. Just go do it, get it done. If you don't get them on time, then we're going to talk. Or if you don't get them in a way that is very, very the quality that we're expecting, we're going to talk. But otherwise, I don't care. I don't care how you get it done. Just get it done. And allow for some flexibility. Now, I'll tell you what, especially in a government setting, and as you just mentioned with the ages of some of the managers and the experience, it's a little bit of a challenge to get people to think that's a really valid way of, how do you know your people are working? Well, I see if they come back with the work that they were assigned to do or not. But it's a challenge. It's something to get over. Right? Yeah. Good point. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Good point. Huh. The transit service, sure. Transit service. That's a really good point. Because if we're more of a model of work whenever, wherever, then it's like these transit services and other things almost need to be available just the same way, whenever, wherever.
But why do you have to go to your office? And where is your office?
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say that public transportation cannot be
Yeah. Well.
okay.
Yeah, Matt. Good point. Chris. Oh. Very. Okay. More demand. Point. Point taken. Point taken. All right. Let's move on. And Robert talked a little bit about this in his comments at lunch about retail commercial, right? We're seeing a pretty interesting shift in what's happening. I got to tell you, folks, honestly, I drive around our valley and I see the amount of retail space we've got, and I find myself thinking, how can we support this much retail development? And yeah, Todd here says there's also a lot of empty stores, and that's true. And so yeah, and a lot of our development, when you think about non-residential development, a lot of times the core of that is commercial. It's some kind of commercial activity, and again, our technology has made it possible now, as we've talked about, as Robert talked about, we can do now a lot of our goods shopping a different way, which is online. One way, there's other ways as well. And so there's some interesting things that you see happening in the trends. This is a chart that was taken out of The Economist from just a couple of weeks ago. And what it shows here is just from over the time period, this is for apparel, clothing, right? Nobody shops for clothing online, right? Because you want to go in and try it on, you want to see it, touch it, feel it. You don't shop for clothing online. Well, it was down to close to zero in 2011. Amazon is now to the point where they're on track for later this year surpassing Macy's in the volume of apparel sold. Now, that's a lot of apparel, and that's a lot of retail sales, and will continue to grow. Walmart has a strong online presence. All of these companies now are realizing that online is a way to go to really make some inroads into market share. And so what happens is, this last year, Walmart closed in the United States 150 stores. Walmart closed stores. All you ever hear about was Walmart building new stores and expanding all over the place, right? This last year, they're closing 150 stores. Something's happening, something different is going on, and so what does that mean in the future about our future development? Are we going to see the kind of development that we've had where a lot of it's been anchored by retail? And in some cases, in many of our ordinances, we almost demand retail, don't we? We say, like in some cases on mixed-use type zones and developments, the lowest level has to be retail or commercial or something like that. Well, maybe we're not going to have enough retail and commercial out there to support them. So, I don't know, what is that going to mean? Any thoughts on that, people? What do you think? I mean, somebody else at lunchtime, as Robert was talking about that, he leaned over to me and he said that he had been having a conversation about this with someone as well, and they said, it's kind of a red herring because really when you think about it, some of our biggest retailers like Sears and big companies had catalogs, have long had catalogs, and people would order stuff through the catalogs. So this has been happening, and I think that's true. There is some truth to that. But I think when you look at the percentage of catalog sales versus what people have been doing, in person, there's a bit of a discrepancy there. If this trend continues, and it seems to be, doesn't seem to be anything that's going to diminish this trend, I think we could see some real pretty interesting changes in the makeup of our commercial areas in our communities. Doc? Within walking distance, yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That is a very good point. Yeah, that's a really good point. I'll tell you one of the challenges that we had in Salt Lake City, and Chris probably echo this working with transportation in Salt Lake City. The 9th and 9th, the 15th and 15th, all of those little neighborhood commercial centers that everybody thinks are so cool, and everybody wants one. They think they really are great, and they're cool, and they are. Many of you've been to these, and they are. They're pretty neat, and they're pretty cool. But guess what? They can't survive just on the people that are within walking distance. And so what happens is folks drive to those facilities, and guess where they park? In the neighborhoods. And the neighborhoods just love that. And so, so there's an interesting little, back and forth that occurs here. Let's see. Carrie, let's go to you and then back. Right. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Yes, sir. Ah. So I switched the slide over. So maybe the character of our centers. We talk about having urban centers, and of course we have the downtowns, the traditional downtowns, but then we also are looking at perhaps having urban centers scattered around in our region. Maybe the character of those urban centers is going to be a little different than what we have seen in the past. Maybe we're going to see less retail, and we're going to see more spaces where people can gather and meet. Maybe see more cafes for one thing. That's one thing you can't get online very well, right? Is that cafe experience sitting there. Yeah. Or live entertainment. You know, this doesn't work real well over your laptop screen. I mean, it sort of does, but not live. And so maybe the character of our urban centers changes with those spaces for interaction, with those places, and the commercial character of it changes, and the workplace character of it changes. And maybe it's going to be a much more eclectic kind of an environment that's going to have a lot of different things, and maybe less of some of the things that we have traditionally seen in the past, just kind of depending. People-oriented, good point. Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's the old town center up there. Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Yeah. Good point. Chris? Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. 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 Yeah, good point. I just want to, we're not going to have a lot of time to talk about this, but another whole aspect of this, of course, is the housing. And we're seeing some changing things that are happening there. Not some of it technology related, some of it just social and economic conditions. The rising cost of housing that continues, and arguably there are a number of commentators and studies out there now that say our land use regulations are a good part of of the reason why the cost of housing is rising. So we may need to think about that a little bit, but what it does. But this whole idea of the rental economy, and we see that the rate of home ownership has gone down in recent years and is not increasing much, but the rental market is exploding. People are choosing more to rent to the point where, I mean, it baffled me. I see more apartments being built in this valley now than we have seen maybe ever, but certainly in a long, long time, and yet the rental rates are going up. They continue to rise. And I'm like, wait, we're getting more supply out there, so law of supply and demand says that the rental rates ought to be going down, but it's because they're not even getting close to denting the demand that's out there for rental housing. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. Millennials, what's happened in the financial crisis with people losing homes and not being able to afford them. Some people have said student loans is part of the problem because a lot of these people come out of college now. But the interesting thing was there's some other studies that are showing that that's not necessarily the case. People that highest category demographic of home buyers are college graduates, and they continue to buy homes whether they have student debt or not. So that's not necessarily the case, but there are other factors and other things that are driving it. Then we have, of course, all of the trends that are happening. Accessory dwelling units, as being another form of housing, and something that really is happening a lot all over the place. whether we allow it or not in our communities. We had the biggest debate in Salt Lake City about whether we should allow accessory dwelling units, and they're happening all over, regardless of what the city's ordinance says. Tiny homes, this whole technology of tiny homes and people wanting to have some place where they need less space. So there's a lot of things happening. Mayor? And that's a good point and a good argument. But there are places, not necessarily in the United States, where home ownership is not high, and yet they seem to have fairly stable communities, fairly good places where people will stay long term as a rental, as a rental market or a rental. So I don't know. But we're not used to that. I don't think our society is used to that, and maybe it's changing. Maybe it's changing now, given what's going on. Did I see somebody else? Paul? Yeah. Yeah, good point. So, think about these things. There's a lot of things going on, and maybe it's going to change the way our communities and our urban region, our urban area looks in the future. Um, Interesting times. Really, just about any time is an interesting time. But get over the idea of thinking that we forecast the future by how everything looks today, because things may look very different in the future. I don't know that we can anticipate all of those things. I don't know that we can really anticipate